Hello, in this video I'm going to be telling you 10 films that I think everyone should watch but that you might not have heard of. So the way that I'm testing this is I'm looking at my 19-year-old brother and I'm thinking, has he heard of this movie? If he has not, I consider it people haven't heard of it. If you've heard of any or all of the movies in this list, congratulations, you watch movies. But yeah, these are just films that I think I haven't really heard talked about too much, so hopefully there'll be some movies that are new to you in this list. So there's going to be 10 movies in this video, and they're not in order of kind of how good they are or anything, they're just 10 in a random order, although this first one I'm talking about is extremely good. So the first movie that I think you should watch that you may not have heard of is The Quiet Girl. Now, I have a video on my channel talking about The Quiet Girl, a whole video just dedicated to it, but The Quiet Girl is a very beautiful, intimate film about a girl in Ireland who is essentially being fostered by family friends for a summer, and it's about the girl's experience with these family friends and kind of her experiencing love that she has never felt before and really coming into herself. Now in this film they speak Irish, they speak Gaelic, and there are subtitles, and just this film is, I think it's so wholesome, so beautiful, so heartbreaking, and every frame is art, and everything in this film feels so intentional because it's not a super long film. They kind of get their message out intentionally and quickly, and they say everything they need to say. And yeah, it's just a very beautiful, gorgeous film. If you want to hear more, I do have a video about this film on my channel, which I will put in the description below. So I do have a whole video talking about why I love it. But I will recommend this film to everyone because I think it is beautiful and endearing and wholesome, and just it's one of those films that just makes you happy to be alive and happy to be a part of the human race, restore some of the faith in the human race. Yeah, just a really great movie, and the film is actually inspired by the book Foster, written by Claire Keegan. And if you read books, you've probably heard of Claire Keegan. She is a phenomenal writer, so it's from her source materials, so you just know it's going to be good. At number 2 we have the film Goodbye, Christopher Robin. Now this film is about the kind of conception of Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin, and the life of the author of Winnie the Pooh and his son Christopher Robin. So I'd never heard of this film when we put it on, but it just came up and I thought, yeah, I'll give it a watch. I was obsessed with Winnie the Pooh as a child. I really loved it. It holds a special place in my heart, so I thought, yeah, I'll watch this about the conception of Winnie the Pooh. And I never knew that Christopher Robin was a real person. He was based on a real child, a real boy who had all these stuffed animal teddies. And this film is so interesting because it shows you obviously the conception, the journey of Winnie the Pooh, how it became its success, but it then also shows you the impact that this then had on this child, Christopher Robin. It's honestly, the movie it's interesting, but it's also kind of heartbreaking because Christopher Robin kind of suffered a lot as a result of being associated with Winnie the Pooh. And it's so interesting because when you watch Winnie the Pooh and you think of Winnie the Pooh, you don't think of any of the negative effects that it could have had, and this film just completely shows you that, and how this boy had to grow up with this kind of burden and kind of grow up thinking that his dad didn't really love him that much because he just saw him as this commodity, as this character he could use to make money, essentially. And I've always been very interested in kind of kids' stories and fairy tales and the stories that we tell children, and how, oddly enough, a lot of them seem to have disturbing and kind of sad roots. So it's so interesting that these kids' stories that were made, so things like Winnie the Pooh, Peter Pan, The Little Mermaid, The Railway Children, they are stories that offered so much delight and inspiration and adventure for children all across the world. But usually for them to happen, originally a child had to suffer. So I think that's such an interesting concept, something I'm really interested in. So this basically explores that, and I think it's got some really great performances. You have Dominic Gleeson, he plays the author of Winnie the Pooh, and then you have a few actors play Christopher Robin because he grows up, but for a large part of it, for a lot of the film, he is played by Alex Lawther, who is from The End of the Effing World, if you've seen that series, and I just love him as an actor, and he plays him, and I think the acting is really good. And yeah, it's just a really, really interesting film that I don't think many people would have heard of, many people would have watched, and it's so interesting. It came out around the same time as the Christopher Robin Disney film. It was so interesting to watch both of these films because the tones are just so completely different. Like, they couldn't be more different. So an interesting film that I would recommend. Next up, we have a film that I am quite confident that a lot of people won't have heard of, and this film is called The Children's Act. Now, this is a film starring Emma Thompson, Stanley Tucci, and Fionn Whitehead. And this film is essentially about, I'm not sure if it's a true story or not, but it is about a boy who is a Jehovah's Witness and he gets leukemia. And because he has leukemia, the doctors want to give him a blood transfusion to help him. But his parents refuse because they are Jehovah's, and I didn't know this, but one of the kind of followings of Jehovah's Witnesses is that you can't have blood transfusions because they see your blood as holy, and so if you mix it with someone else's, it's just a really unholy thing to do. You should not be mixing your blood with anyone. So blood transfusions are a big no-no for them, or for any that follow that practice. And the boy himself, who's played by Fionn, he also doesn't want this blood transfusion because of his beliefs. He doesn't want it, even though it could help him survive, it could make him feel a lot better. He doesn't want it. And it's essentially about this judge, who is Emma Thompson, taking this family kind of to court because I believe the hospital is kind of taking them to court because the hospital is like, we want to give you this care, this urgent care that you need, but your parents and you are denying it. And because he's under 18, his parents kind of do have the say. But also, I believe in the UK at least, if you are dealing with a child, the hospital itself and the NHS have some leverage as well. So if the parent says, no, I refuse this, but the hospital deems it as necessary, they have some leverage in actually making it happen despite the parents' wishes. So they take this family to court, and Emma Thompson is essentially the judge who is deciding if he's going to get a blood transfusion against his wishes and against his parents' wishes or not. And yeah, it's just a really, really interesting story, really interesting concept. It's really fascinating to kind of see Emma grapple with this and kind of think, you need this to live, but you don't want it. So how do I feel about that? Grappling with the morality of that, and her and this boy end up kind of forming this relationship after the hearing. And yeah, just a very, very interesting film, all about faith, belief, just life and living your life and how you live your life. And it's also quite sad as well, put that disclaimer out there. But I've seen this film probably about 4 times now. I don't know why. I kind of have a morbid obsession with it because it's definitely not a fun movie, but it's very, very interesting. And yeah, I would highly, highly recommend it if you have not seen it or heard of it. Next up, we have The Vanishing of Sydney Hall. Now, this is Logan Lerman starring in this film, and it is essentially about a writer who vanishes. So he publishes a really, really amazing book, kind of think like Catcher in the Rye-esque, publishes a book and then disappears. I think this private investigator is trying to track him down. It's about this private investigator trying to track him down, tracking kind of what happened in his life, and you see kind of his life events as well. So you see like him in secondary school, this writer, and you see like him when he's dating and stuff like that, and you kind of are piecing together this puzzle, this mystery of this writer, why he's vanishing, why he's decided to stop writing, and all of these things. And this film is low-key trauma porn. Like so many things happen, like just so many bad things happen in this film, and it made me incredibly emotional, incredibly sad, but I did enjoy it. I think even though it's trauma porn, it's kind of, for me, there wasn't a point where I was like, okay, this is too much now, like stop, making sad things happen. I didn't get to that point, but there are definitely a lot of sad things that happen, and it deals with a lot of heavy themes as well, so I'd just say that before you watch it. But I think it is a really good movie. It's really interesting to kind of try and piece together this author's life and yeah, do questions about what it means to make a character, make a person, make a story. Yeah, would highly recommend. Next up we have the film Jackie. Now this film is about Jackie Kennedy, and it follows her from the point of JFK getting assassinated and then the aftermath. So it's kind of shows the effects that it had on her and kind of what she had to do. Yeah, what she had to do, how she planned the funeral, how she was feeling, all this stuff. Just found this film fascinating because as someone from the UK, I didn't really learn about the presidents too much. I did a little bit. I do remember we did learn about JFK a little bit, but we never went in depth. But it was so interesting because throughout looking at it, and I think for a lot of people, when you think about JFK getting assassinated and all that stuff, you never consider Jackie and think about kind of, wait a second, she was in the car and she experienced this whole thing. And it's kind of this interesting thing of her husband was assassinated in front of her, and then it's kind of like, yep, you've got, I can't remember exactly how long the period was, but then it's like, yep, you've got 15 days to now vacate your home because she lived in the White House and he was no longer president. So yeah, just interesting things like that you just don't really think about. And Natalie Portman plays Jackie, and I think she did an amazing job. I always love a movie that is kind of a character study, and this film is directed by the same man who made Spencer, so it's very much that vein of taking a character and really going in deep on them, going in depth on this character, and it's just super interesting, very sad, very heartbreaking, but yeah, just so interesting to see this female figure in history and learn about her and learn about how these events affected her life. I would highly recommend Jackie. The cinematography is also gorgeous as well. Next up we have the film The Dressmaker. This film is so good. If you have not heard of it, you've got to watch The Dressmaker. So The Dressmaker stars Kate Winslet, and I think she's in New Zealand, and she essentially lives in this small town. So it's set like, I don't even know when it's set, like the 19th century or something. She lived in this small town, and a really small town, like think they're in a desert and then they've got a few like wooden houses, like a really small town. And the story is all about kind of small town biases, small town prejudices, stereotypes, all this stuff. So her mum was a single mum, so she was already starting life on the back foot because people saw her mum as something and they saw her as something because her mum was a single mum. And she's kind of already the outsider of this town, and essentially in her childhood something happens and she's now ostracized because of this thing that happened. So she gets sent away because she can't possibly live in this town after what has happened. So she gets sent away. I believe she goes to Paris and she learns about fashion. She learns about dressmaking because that's her passion. And this film is about her coming back as, I think now a 30-year-old, coming back and kind of reclaiming the town, kind of coming back after being driven away. She's coming back to the town. She wants to find out kind of what happened to send her away, because she has memories of it, but she was a child, so it's kind of a little bit blurry and probably all very traumatic. So she's coming back to learn what's going on. She's coming back to see her mum and to kind of reclaim a bit of this town. Now, this film is a dark comedy, and it's definitely very dark but also very funny as well. I think it's genius. It's so clever. It's such a good time. It's like this film, it was just all the emotions. I can't remember laughing, crying my eyes out, like being scared, like there's just everything in this movie, and I think it's just so good for the type of movie that it is, kind of an outrageous hyper reality dark comedy, because like loads of things happen where you're like, this is crazy, and it's a very kind of dramatic film as well. I think for the genre that it is, it does so well, and it's just so good, so funny, and Liam Hemsworth plays her love interest, so if you're interested in him, he's in there as well. And yeah, just a really, really nice movie, really, really good dark comedy, probably one of my favourite dark comedies, and I would highly recommend it. Next up we have the film Life. Now this film is about James Dean, and James Dean is played by Dane DeHaan, and then it is about a journalist who got to know him. The journalist is played by Robert Pattinson, and essentially there's this journalist who developed a relationship with James Dean and did a kind of expose on him and took all these photos and took iconic photos. So there's the one where he's kind of in the city with his big black coat, like with the big collar, if you know which photos I'm talking about there. He took those photos, and the film is essentially about this journalist getting to know James Dean and kind of trying to work him out, getting to know, yeah, what makes this massive star, because at this point he is like a rising star. What makes him up? What is he about? And I really enjoyed this film. I know a lot of people didn't like the fact that Dane DeHaan was casted as James Dean, which I think he does do a good job. He definitely does not look exactly like James Dean. I don't think anyone was claiming that he did, because he definitely doesn't, but I think he did a good job at capturing him. Bear in mind, I've only watched one James Dean film, so I've only seen him in one thing, but I think Dane did a pretty good job. I think there are a lot worse people you could cast for a role like this, so I think it was okay. Yeah, I just really enjoyed this film. Again, I said I like character studies, and this is kind of delving into James Dean as a person, as a character, which is highly interesting to me. And the main thing that stands out in this film for me is that at the end there's this passage where James Dean says this poem, and it's this poem all about going home. We must get home, we must get home again. And I just love that part and that sentiment so much, because a big part of the film was how James Dean really loved where he lived. He loved his home, and he kind of disliked the like Hollywood atmosphere and the Hollywood vibe, and he always longed to go home to his ranch or wherever he lived, someplace like that, to his little country town. And yeah, just the ending scenes of this film are so powerful for me, and I really love the poem that they use. So I would really recommend Life. I think it's probably not for everyone, but if you like James Dean, or you like Dane DeHaan, or you like character studies, it might be the one for you. Next up we have the film Mummy. Now this was on my top 10 favourite films of all time video, which is actually quite dated now. I wonder if I went back, would I actually have different favourites? Probably would, but I think Mummy is still there. And Mummy is just an amazing film. It is set in Quebec, so they speak French and use subtitles if you don't understand French, like me. And it's essentially about this single mum, and her son's in an institution because he's like a juvenile delinquent, I suppose, and he gets kicked out. And it's about her having to look after him and having to try and keep them afloat with money, and while simultaneously trying to build the relationship with her son, because he is obviously, he's naughty, he's violent, all this stuff, he's troubled. And yeah, it's all about that. And one part of this film that is really interesting is it kind of has this almost dystopian element, in that there's a law in this film that doesn't actually exist, that the director was kind of trying to explore, which he basically created this law that, like, if you have a child who is troubled or whatever, is juvenile, you can just give them away to the state. You can just give them away and absolve yourself of responsibility and say, you take them, I can't deal with it. And so in this world, that law exists. It doesn't exist in real life, but in this world, that law exists. And it's kind of this mum navigating the world of her son while that law exists, and her being aware of that, and kind of her thinking like, can I do this? Do I follow this law that I can take up? And yeah, it kind of follows that. This film is just amazing, stunning, I love it so much. It makes me cry, it makes me laugh, the cinematography is beautiful, and specifically there's this scene quite near the end where it's this sequence where you see the future of this boy's life and how his life could play out, and you see what happens in quick succession in a sequence, and honestly that's one of the most beautiful sequences I've ever seen in film. I love it so much. So if you're going to watch this film, you could just watch it for that sequence, because that sequence is breathtaking every time for me. And yeah, I just would highly recommend this film. I think it is so beautiful and so enjoyable, but you may cry. Warning there, you may cry. Next we have the film Ida. Now Ida is about a nun. Ida is about a nun living in, I'm not too sure where, maybe Germany, and she's nearly becoming a nun. So she's not fully a nun yet, but she's nearly there, and it's kind of, she's making this leap, but then she keeps meeting people who are like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, think about the things that this means, and blah blah blah. And essentially Ida's parents are both dead, and she kind of reconnects with her aunt, because I think she visits family before she is becoming a nun. Her aunt tells her some revelations involving her parents and kind of their deaths, and it leads her and her aunt to kind of go on this journey together to try and figure it out, essentially. And I watched Ida while I was studying film at university, so I watched it in class with everyone, and I just love this film so much. It's so beautiful, it's so powerful. I think the performances are amazing, it's heartbreaking, it's harrowing, but it is well worth a watch. I think it is so good, and it's an important story being told with very interesting themes of family and loss and grief and freedom. And yeah, I would just highly recommend Ida. Now we're on to my final film, and the tone of this one is very different to Ida, but this film is The Kings of Summer. Now this film is about 3 boys in high school, and I think it's their last summer before they go off to college, university, so they want to make it memorable, they want to make stuff happen, and especially they want to kind of like get girls, they want to get girlfriends, they had crushes and they want to get girlfriends. So it's all about that, and these boys essentially decide that they are going to live in the woods. Yeah, they're gonna live in the woods for this summer and just have the best time ever and party. And yeah, this film was actually really good. Me and my family put it on just as a, let's give it a try, we've never seen this, and it was actually surprisingly good. Like, actually really funny, entertaining, like the plot was good, the concept was interesting. Like, yeah, it was actually a good film. And you have Rico from Hannah Montana in this movie, obviously grown up, and he's so funny. I think he's the funniest part about this movie. But yeah, that's all I can really say. This film it's funny, and I think it's worth a watch. It's definitely more of an easy watch than some of the other ones I've listed on this list, but you know, it's good to get some variation. So if you're looking for something that's more of an easy watch, more of a comedy, more of a coming of age, this is one for you. Kings of Summer is the one for you. That was my top 10 films that you've probably never heard of. As I said, if you've heard of all of these, amazing, great, rewatch them. And if you haven't heard of any of them, then there you go, here's some new films for you to add to your watch list or to give a go if you found them interesting. It was actually interesting making this list. I went through my letterbox essentially and looked at my likes and was like, okay, which ones of these does my brother not know? And there's actually loads. I actually came up with about 30, I would say. So I might do more parts to this video because there are more films. There are more films that I think are really good that I don't believe many people have heard of. So there could very well be more parts coming in the future, but we will see. But that is it for now. Happy watching. Let me know if you watch any of these films and if you think they're rubbish or if you think they're good, because obviously this is all subjective. This is my own opinion. This is what I think is good. Maybe not everyone will think it's good. Yeah, but I hopefully this list gave a diverse range of films, a diverse range of genres that would appeal to different people. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.